Alright guys, welcome back for another video of HAIKYU Fly High, and today we'll be doing a team building guide for the Camel dupe, so SP Hoshimi Kura and also SP Hiragami. Now before moving on to the actual teams themselves, it's very important that you are familiar with Hoshimi Kura's skills because there are a few things in his kit which will determine the way you want to build your team. Okay, so the few things that I'm going to call out, number one is going to be his skill resonance. Skill Resonance 4, what's going to happen is that when you play the combo duo together, because his skill 2 is going to become an automaton, that basically allows him to benefit from Hiragami's skill 1, which basically means your ultimate cooldown will reduce by 4. And this is not just the block ultimate, but also his spike ultimate. And what that basically means is that Hoshimi Kura is then going to be capable of spamming his spike in the sense that he can do it every 4 net crossing. Now, of course, what this means from a team building point of view is that because he can spike every other turn, you a lot of time probably don't have such a reliance on multiple spikers on a team anymore. So you can probably get away with just 2 spikers on a team, not always, but let's say if you also play someone such as Suki, who can also eventually become a 4 net crossing cooldown due to the interaction with Hiragami skill 1 as well, then in those kind of scenarios, then yeah, you can get away with just 2 spikers. However, if your Hoshimi Kura is not a skill level 4, then it's very likely that you have to go back to the traditional method of having 3 spikers onto your team. So that's one thing you have to bear in mind when you're team building. I will kind of call it out as I show you the different example teams that I have crafted. But just bear in mind that depending on what resonance your Hoshimi Kura is, it will determine whether you need 2 spikers or 3 spikers on your team. And then the other thing you also want to call out is going to be for skill resonance 2. Now this one says that when the line of speciality counters the opponent, you're going to get further increase in all of your stats. So basically, the matching specialty is going to gain 20%. Power attack is also getting an additional 20% as well. And once again, this kind of just means that when you're team building, especially in PvP matches, remember to always build a team which can actually counter the opponent. And the way team specialty works in this game is that as long as your starting specialty counters the opponent, even if you change it afterwards, there's bonus is going to stay. Okay, so as a result, what you should be doing, like even if you don't have skill level 2, to be honest, just a good practice is that you should always be team building multiple different variations of the team so that you can always start off countering the opponent and then just make your substitution manually to get into your actual optimal team. Okay, so that's the second thing you have to bear in mind with Hoshimi Kura, and that's kind of what I'm gonna do a lot of different teams based on speciality later on. Okay, and then the other thing you also have to bear in mind is gonna be his skill 2. And basically what this one is saying is that if your lineup is block or quick attack, Hoshimi Kura is going to increase his block stat. If your specialty is power attack or receive, he's going to increase his receive stat. And this is also something interesting that you have to bear in mind, which is the fact that if you do actually have a line of specialty which is block or quick attack, what's going to happen is that Hoshimi will be further increasing your block. However, remember, in order to have a specialty which is block, you have to have at least 4 block label characters on your team as well. And then what that potentially means is that you won't actually have many receive label characters. And Hoshimi Kura, even though he does has a skill which can be used as receive, however, because he doesn't have that extra stats from receive, he's not actually going to be suitable as your main receiver. So even though this basically is making Hoshimi Kura very versatile, however, it's not really bridging the gap in your team building formation. And what that basically shows you is that if you're actually going for a block or quick attack team, Hoshimi Kura should be treated as a blocker, not a receiver. And as a result, your other members of the team need to be able to pick up the receive, and also vice versa. If your specialty is actually power attack or receive, then Hoshimi Kura can definitely act as a receiver. However, he shouldn't really be treated as a blocker in those kind of instances, and then therefore you need to bring other blockers with you into the team. Okay, so those are all the things you have to bear in mind when actually team building with Hoshimi Kura, and so that's just something for you guys to consider. Now let me show you the actual teams itself. So the first one I'm going to show you is going to be a power and receive team, purely because there are a lot of characters which have both the power and receive label. Now, if you remember what I've said before, basically when you're team building, you should have Hoshimi Kura and also Hirogami. Now, if your Hoshimi Kura is actually at skill rating 4, then he would be able to spam his spike every other turn, and that makes a very, very interesting combo with Okawa, because Okawa essentially is capable of giving massive amount of buff to Hoshimi, and if Hoshimi can actually spam his ultimate attack, and bear in mind this is not just for spiking, but also for his other action, because Okawa also obviously actually improve his stats all around, then as a result it's going to be very, very strong, and that's kind of why you want SP Okawa facing opposite to Hoshimi. Now, this is obviously going to benefit the most if Hoshimi Kura is actually skill in full, so he can actually spam all of those ultimate and therefore take advantage of the buff on Okawa. However, if you're, let's say, Hoshimi Kura is only at skill rating 1 or skill rating 2, then you don't have to play Okawa. You can simply substitute that for a different set that you have. That's absolutely fine. Okay, now with this kind of setup, one thing you have to remember is that it can be somewhat tricky in terms of the liberal substitution front, because Hoshimi Kura is obviously a very strong spiker, and then you also have Hirogami, who's a very strong blocker and also give huge amount of buff. So ideally, you actually want both of them to be on the court the whole time. So ideally, I don't really want to set my liberal substitution to, let's say, a win spiker or mid blocker. I can potentially set it to setter or opposite hitter. However, in this kind of team, if you actually have Okawa, you also kind of want to avoid Okawa being subbed out, and there aren't really that many opposite hitter in the game right now either. So this can make liberal substitution a bit difficult. And the easiest way out, considering the fact that you will be playing Hoshimi Kura in a receive and also power team, and remember his receive will then be buffed by his own skill 2 as a result. So as a result, you can actually basically have Hoshimi Kura act as a receiver, and especially if he can have that combo up as skill rating 4 with Hirogami, he can spam his receive as well. And basically the best way forward, in my opinion, for power and receive team is actually to play without liberal substitution. Now, because of the team rotation, Hoshimi Kura can only be at the back for 3 rotations, so as a result, you also want someone else on the other side who can also spam his receive, and that's kind of why you're going to bring Iwazuyumi out. Iwazuyumi not only is capable of spamming receive, he also have that power and receive label, which is perfect for the speciality, as well as this bond for the Okawa. So that's kind of why it's a bit of a no-brainer. Now, in terms of the liberal front, because you were not really going to be playing anyone, there are 2 things you can do here. One is you are just going to play someone with high rarity just to soak up the team power. Or 2, you can go for someone potentially for school bound, depending on who the remaining members of your team are going to be. However, in this case, I'm going to go for Komori just for that higher team power, and also because as you are character, hopefully a lot of people would have been able to get him. And then, because you are playing Komori, it also makes it a bit of a no-brainer to play Sakusa as well, who once again have that bond with Komori to further increase your team power, and on top of that, also a power and receive label as well. So once again, it kind of goes towards your team speciality. Now, if you do not have Sakusa, you can also use the free Ginchima that we have obtained as part of the gym cleanup event. He also have the power and receive label, so he can work very well there. Now, as for the last member of the team here, it's where it can get a bit tricky. So like I said, right now your team is going to be very strong at receive. However, Hoshimi Kura is not going to get that buff on the blocking end. So yeah, sure, he can block every now and then, but his block is not going to be very strong. So for the last member here, ideally you actually want to have another blocker. So if you're going for just a power specialty team, then here for the blocker, you have lots of choices. You can go for niche rate whoever you want. However, if you're actually going for that receive specialty, remember you still need one other receive type character onto your team. And in those kind of cases, the best choice you're going to have is going to be SP Kuro, because he can fulfill that condition for receive, as well as also having a very strong block to actually balance out your team. Okay, so this is going to be my suggestion if you want to go for a power or receive type of team. Now let's move on to a quick or block type of team. So the main issue with a quick and block type of team is because you're going to have lots of really strong blockers, because lots of quick spike character also have that block label. However, what's going to happen is that you are going to be relatively weak on the receive end, because a lot of your characters will be capable of blocking, even though you have the lots of Crow, for example, who can also receive, but that's only one receive every 6 net crossing, etc. And Hoshimi Kura, even though he does have a receive skill, he's not going to get that buff from his skill 2 due to the team speciality, so he's not going to be the best receiver either. So in this kind of cases, you have to make sure you actually have a good way of receiving. Now, this can be tricky because let's say if you also want to play Okawa, he's actually a block label, actually a power label character and therefore not receive. That basically means if you have four character with block label and then also Okawa, for that skill resistance, full effect, etc., then you are essentially left with only one other slot on your team, and that's not really going to be able to cut it for you to actually have a good receive every single rotation. So in this kind of scenario, you do actually have to make use of your liberal. Now, the problem is you definitely do not want to sub out your Hoshimi Mirai because he's not the best character in the game. You don't want to sub out your Saturn. So the only way you can do it is actually sub out your mid blocker and for a block and also receive quick spike speciality, you are going to end up with lots of mid blockers anyway. So in those kind of occasions, you would basically essentially want to play 4 mid blockers so that you can always set your liberal to sub out one of them. Now, here is where the rotation is going to be important because the way it works is that the liberal is going to sub out the first mid blocker with the lowest receive stat. So what in this case is going to be like is that if you do actually end up having 4 mid blockers, so basically in the last section here, even though I didn't put on one, it will be essentially another mid blocker. Okay, so I'm just going to show you guys now. In fact, let me just put Hinata for the time being. But basically what you want to do is that you have to decide which 2 mid blocker you want to protect for them not to be subbed off, and then you want to put 2 other mid blockers in front of them to act as a decoy for them to be subbed out by Nishinoya. Okay, so in this instance, for example, let's say if your Hoshimi Koro is at skill level 4, he can have a spike cooldown of 4 net crossing. In those kind of cases, I still need someone else to be able to spike every now and then. So I kind of want to actually protect one of my spikers at all the time in order for them not to be subbed out. So in those kind of occasions, for example, I can say, let me protect my Suki. So I'll put my Kuro in front of my Suki so that my Kuro will always be subbed out instead of Suki whenever the rotation works. And then also I could also say something, for example, if I really want to protect my Hiragami for those insane technique buff, I can put Hinata in front of my Hiragami so that my Hinata actually gets subbed out rather than Hiragami. Okay, so those are kind of things to bear in mind. Depending on which 2 mid blockers you actually want to protect from liberal substitution, you just need to put 2 other mid blockers right in front of them. Okay, so that's basically the way it works, and I already just gave you guys a spoiler alert, which is the fact that I'm going to play 4 mid blockers. Now, in terms of the actual choices you want to go for mid blockers, I strongly recommend Suki and Kuro. Now, the reason for this is, first of all, Suki have a very strong synergy with Hiragami skill 1 in the sense that he also have 2 ultimate attack, and therefore both of them can be reduced down to just 4 net crossing due to this synergy. And then Crow is also a very good choice because, like I said, you're already going to be somewhat weak on the receive end, and Crow does have that receive labor, and also at the same time also very strong bond with Suki as well. Okay, so those two I will almost say a must-have in kind of like a block or quick speciality team. Now, if you're just going for a block speciality team, you have already met your condition here. So for the last slot, you can really do whatever you want. So for example, I put Nishinoya here purely because he can spam receive, and that makes it very good for formations such as this, which lacks a strong receiver. However, let's say if you do not have Nishinoya and you want to play Komari instead, that's also absolutely fine. What you can do is you play Komari here, then you let's say go for Sakusa here, you buff up your team power and you still retain that block label. So that's also absolutely fine. And in those kind of cases, you can even swap your Suki and Kuro out because basically what you want is that you already have Sakusa capable of spam, well not spamming, but capable of doing a few spikes when Hoshimi are not capable of spamming. So in those kind of cases, you don't actually need to protect your Suki as much. So you can actually use Suki as a decoy for Kuro or for Hiragami, etc. Okay, so you can swap out your rotation accordingly depending on that. However, alternatively, let's say if you don't have Sakusa and Komari, or for example, if you actually want to go for a quick specialty team, which right now you wouldn't actually be able to do so because you only have 3 characters of that label, then what you can do instead is that you go for another mid blocker with a quick label. So in those kind of cases, for example, you can go for Hinata with that quick label. You can also go for someone like Tendo or in the future Lief, etc. Okay, so there are loads of choices here as well, depending on what specialty you want to build. Now, obviously, if we actually talk about quick specialty, you might be thinking, why don't we just go for Miya twins? That's absolutely fine. I'll also go a lion for you guys here. For Miya Twins setup, it's going to be slightly different, and also the reason why I didn't mention it earlier is because of the fact that you can't really play Oikawa alongside with the Miya Twins. The two really contradict with each other, and a lot of time, personally, I think just Oikawa is a better choice. However, if you do want to play a dedicated quick specialty team with the Miya Twins, here's how you can do it. So definitely remove Oikawa because the two contradict with each other. You're going to play both of the Miya Twins together, so they will be kept separately. Now you're still going to have Hoshiyumi and Hirogami here out, and basically in order for you guys to have a quick specialty, literally the four of them already have here, and you can do whoever you want for the last remaining two slot. Once again, because of the liberal substitution, you can't really sub out Wind Spiker for Hoshimi. You can't really sub out the setters for Miya due to the Miya Twins for the opposite hitter. So once again, you can only really sub out mid blocker. So in those kind of cases, the last two remaining members are still going to be mid blocker. A natural choice is obviously going to be for Tendo because you also have the Winter Break trio bond here as well. And then for the last remaining slot, personally, once again, depending on whether or not your Hoshimi Kora is at skill rating 4, how much he needs another second spiker. But basically, you can also go for Suki to guarantee you have a spike ultimate every single time. Or if you're not so precious about that, you can also go for Crow instead for extra stronger block. And also once he rotates to the back, well, actually, no, he will just be subbed out by Nishinoya. But still, he is able to essentially provide more buff for your team at the same time as well. Okay, so there's a few more choices here for the last remaining slot for Winter Trio / Miya Twins type of team as well. Okay. But yeah, so that's just going to be some of the example teams I crafted up for Camo Duo. In all honesty, they're very, very universal duo. You can't really go wrong with them. You can literally slot them into any kind of team. I didn't even talk about some of the more fun or niche teams, such as the schoolbound team. For example, with Miya Twins, I can also easily go for Akaki as my liberal and then bring another Inarizaki team member onto the quarter as well, such as Kinjimara, and then I can also have a Narazaki Schoolbound for Camo Duo. Similarly, I can also easily change this team, which right now already features 4 Karasuno players, so this is essentially a Schoolbound for Karasuno as well. So you can definitely use Camo Duo in all kinds of different ways for lots of different interesting team builds. Okay, so yeah, so that's just some of the example I came up with. Let me know how you are building them.